Thomas Jefferson. I'm chilled because I'm thinking of all the ways that in 2012 we have a lot in common with these guys over 200 years later.
And I'm thinking they're a bunch of hypocrites and jerks for laying all these ideals out there and then not even really subscribing to them. How do you write the Declaration of Independence, Jefferson? How do you put a signature on it, Franklin, while they are slaves bringing you tea? I don't understand. No. Not okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
While I'm here to talk about the similarities, I do recognize, in fact, we need to recognize that a lot of things have changed over 200 years' time. It would be ridiculous not to recognize that, and we'd be in a worse place in terms of thinking about who we are and where we're going if we didn't acknowledge change. But we're here to talk about the Enlightenment because the Enlightenment ideals are the ones that still define how we think about our country, how we think about this place where we are, how we figure out how to be American. We're still working off the ideas that came from the Enlightenment.
I think those ideas are fantastic, but I also think that this notion of maximizing pleasure and maximizing profit through those ideals is deeply problematic, especially when you think about someone like Thomas Jefferson, who owned Sally Hemings, has 6 children with her, and then doesn't exactly keep the promise to free them. It's like that. There's this thing, and then there's this thing, and then there's the space in the middle. That is a problem.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's so many things that are horrible and creepy when I think about Thomas Jefferson and Sally Hemings, and just one is that Jefferson was 30 years older than her. Another is that Jefferson took her to France because it suited him, because it made life easier for him, and it's impossible not to try to imagine, to try to speculate what that experience was like for her. What a surprise that we have so many records about Thomas Jefferson and we have nothing about Sally Hemings as an individual. What were her thoughts about her relationships? What were her thoughts about her identity? But this conflict, this contrast, this example actually helps me make the point that I'm making. The Founding Fathers are our role models for the ideals we have about America. And they are also our older siblings. They're the ones who modeled behavior for us. They're the ones that show us how many ways there are to fall short of that ideal. And I just can't resist reading a little of what I wrote in preparation for this. So sorry to be so boring.
Oh, here we go. All right.
This is the New World. This is Europe's fresh start. This is what the Puritans hoped would be the city on a hill for all to look up to. And this is also the place where slavery was institutionalized on a hemispheric scale and where Native Americans experienced genocide. I'm arguing that America is both the ideal and our horrible record of falling short of the ideal. I think that's still true in 2012. Aren't we still patriotic about our country, even while we have real doubts about the politicians we elect to govern it? Don't we celebrate democracy and equality, but we're still suspicious of our neighbors? How is it that we are so hypocritical and so comfortable with our hypocrisy? I'm saying it's because we're still living out a big part of our legacy from the Enlightenment.
I get that, and it makes me think about the speech of Polly Baker, all right, and this idea that there's something naturally good or naturally orderly about what we are as human beings and as citizens of a country. But what's problematic about that is that this fresh start doesn't really seem that fresh at all. So, I mean, look at the ending of the speech of Polly Baker. It seems pretty great. She's not exactly getting that statue erected to her memory, but she is going to get a husband because marriage for women in the 18th century is just so super great. Yeah, what's the point of having all these ideals if there isn't really a fresh start, if there isn't really a retreat from the old narrative, the old power structures, the old hierarchy? And I think that's what really bothers me about the Enlightenment, that there's all this flash, but there's nothing behind it. You know, there's no substance. Yeah.
Yeah, when you say flash, what I think is a kind of an awareness that things aren't exactly according to plan, that we're caught in this web of hypocrisy, this impossibility of getting a truly fresh start, of really cleaning up our mess. And Franklin is aware of this. He knows at the end of the way to wealth that people are going to ignore all the good advice they've just been hearing and spend all their money wastefully and be in just as bad a trouble, if not worse, than they were before. He knows when he tells us in his autobiography that he's going to begin his bold and arduous project of moral perfection, that he has no way of reaching that goal. He's giving us both the goal and the awareness that we're falling short. He understands that we will be able to see our flaws, that we'll be able to see our vanity if we simply use the tools of the Enlightenment to explore our individual experience.
Well, what's the point of saying, well, I know I'm going to fall short, and then doing nothing about it? I mean, I know it's, Puritan style to acknowledge that you're doing a bad thing and then try to work on it and feel guilty about it. But how easy it is for him, someone like him, to say, oh, well, I didn't do this thing right, and then move on with his life. He's not necessarily going to suffer for it. In fact, he goes to great pains to show you that he doesn't suffer for acknowledging his hypocrisy. That's not fair. That's not how it's supposed to work. Especially when there are people who are not like him, who don't enjoy the privilege of falling short and then still getting to go to France and be a superstar and study electricity for fun.
My best example of this that you're describing is Jefferson in the rough draft for the Declaration of Independence, including a line about the slave trade and blaming King George III for allowing this horrible abomination to take place while he's participating in it and profiting from it.
Yeah.
But this is, again, what the Enlightenment brings to us. It's this idea that there is a right way for the world to be. In Tom Paine's phrase, there is a common sense that we all participate in. If we didn't have that, if we didn't start with that legacy, we wouldn't think about America the way we do now. We wouldn't talk about our problems the way we do now. We wouldn't have the same optimistic expectation that we can actually address and possibly even fix our problems. That's an Enlightenment legacy that they've given to us, even while they fell so short of achieving those goals themselves.
Well, then what are we supposed to be building on? I mean, yes, common sense, but then what? There has to be something that comes afterward. It can't just be, oh, well, I didn't get organized. There has to be something after that. And the whole surface or the whole idea that appearance is reality, you can't do that forever. There has to be something behind it. There has to be.
I think what happens for us is that we look for other stories rather than settling for one version of common sense, for one version of the Enlightenment. We look at figures like Phyllis Wheatley, who, how much would we love to talk to her now in 2012 and get her version of what it was like to write poetry, to make that poetry fit the style of the day, to address the topics that were accepted by the poets of the day, and who knows what was left out. Who knows what we didn't get to read because it wouldn't have been allowed.
Yeah, it's so frustrating to read that work and see her trying to meet this ideal that really, it had nothing to do with her. So that makes me feel a tremendous sense of loss, rather than probably the curiosity and wonder that it should inspire. So the rage is easier, much easier than...
I understand that, and I also think that there are things coming our way that bring us back to that sense of injustice, to that sense of impatience with a kind of common sense, with a sense of an overarching order. I think that one of the reasons why June Jordan is in this part of the course is that she brings that contemporary sense that we're not getting the whole story, that there were